My name is Kimberly Dowdell, and I'm a principal in the Chicago office of HOK, an architect, as well as the 2019-2020 National President of NOMA, which is the National Organization of Minority Architects. So I'm really delighted to introduce an amazing panel, and they'll introduce themselves more directly in just a few moments. But I just wanted to show on the screen here who we have: Brenna Berman, Dr. Suzette McKinney, and Andrea Zopp, who will all really weigh in on the amazing potential that we have here in Chicago to build up what we're calling the third coast. I think most people know the East Coast and West Coast as areas that have a really strong science and technology ecosystem, if you will. And so a lot of talent is going to the East and West Coast, but increasingly Chicago is being seen as a location where we can start to really build up the talent and the resources and the infrastructure. And so part of HOK's role as a global architecture firm is to focus on the infrastructure and specifically design. So I wanted to actually just set up the context for why we are, why we're hosting this kind of event. So HOK is a global design firm with 24 offices around the world, and we're working on a lot of science and technology and healthcare projects. So just wanted to do a very quick overview of some of the projects that are relevant to what we're talking about here today. Projects that deal with not only cutting edge science and technology and healthcare, but also that have a close tie to the community that in which they exist. So the first project, actually, I was a part of the New York office of HOK when this project came online about 12 years ago, the Harlem Hospital in New York, which basically is an extension of the existing hospital, but it also incorporates community input and of course the arts. And so this is a mural that really animates the streetscape on 125th Street, or I'm sorry, on Lenox at 135th. And then also Eskenazi Hospital in Indianapolis, which I know is not is actually also Midwest, but it's another great example of community input in the design process and really focusing on well-being for that particular community in the surrounding area. Similarly, Pittsburgh has the UPNC Vision and Rehab Tower that we also worked on, that again focuses on how do we really bring together the different sectors, the public sector, the private sector, academia, and the not-for-profit sector to really create facilities that that focus on helping us really facilitate a more comprehensive approach to health and wellness, science, and technology. In DC, we've got the Consolidated Forensics Laboratory, which has a similar story of community engagement. And then finally, for this group of projects in San Francisco, so all the way on the other coast, another forensic services facility. So that's essentially, just a quick overview of some of the projects that we've worked on, at least in the US. And part of the reason why we brought this panel together was to talk about how Chicago can specifically respond to, an increased demand for, for science and technology facilities, specifically, in the context of a global pandemic that we're all navigating right now. How do we, ensure that we are at the forefront of developing, the science and technology advancements that will help us to not only overcome our current challenges, but future challenges. So, part of what what we want to talk about is the importance of research and development in the science landscape, in particular, the clustering effect, which is really about bringing together different types of science and technology assets in the same general areas of clustering, such that we're really able to build off of the the benefits and the talent that's come together to create what are called sort of conscious collisions, or sometimes unconscious collisions of data and information and creativity. And then also looking at the power of urban infrastructure and how our cities are great places for people to come together and solve our more complex problems. So looking at how we can use urban infrastructure as a way to really advance science and technology. And then last but not least, just generating prosperity for everyone. And so looking at the way that the different sectors can come together and really ensure that everyone has access to economic opportunity, that everyone has access to training in the science and technology fields, such that we're really creating a more even playing field for everyone, so that our cities can have a more equitable landscape, not just for science and technology, but more generally. So really excited about the panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Brenna now to tell us a little bit about herself and City Tech. Sharing.
Oh, there we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kimberly. I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Brenna Berman. I'm the CEO of a Chicago-based organization called City Tech Collaborative. We were founded a little more than 5 years ago, and we're an urban solution accelerator. And what we do is focus on the ecosystem necessary to bring science and technology innovations into our cities for greater impact. And we do that in a couple of ways. We focus on those challenges that really can't be solved by any one organization, and health and wellness challenges, whether you're talking about things like diabetes or air quality, really fit the bill for that, right? There isn't any one organization that can solve that problem. And those problems really do require engagement directly with our residents in a city. You really want to hear from them what kind of solutions are going to fit their lifestyle, how they're going to engage directly with and around in their community, whether you're talking about the built environment or cultural organizations that make cities their home. So we bring together an ecosystem of partners to invest in solutions to the barriers that prevent cities from being fully happy and healthy and productive places. We have a process that helps those partners invest in those solutions, and carry those solutions through to a commercialization process so that they can be scaled and maintained in the marketplace. And we do all of that with community engagement so that the voice of the resident is always present in the process. And by doing that, what we're trying to do is ensure that the perspective of the resident is as loud as the perspective of the experts that understand the problem, from their perspective, but may not have lived that problem on the ground the way that our community residents are every day.
Great. Thank you so much. And up next, we'll have Dr. Suzette McKinney.
Thank you, Kimberly, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. As Kimberly said, my name is Dr. Suzette McKinney. I am the CEO of the Illinois Medical District. The Illinois Medical District is a 560-acre healthcare and technology innovation district. We were established in 1941 with the clear goal of developing and sustaining a hub within the city of Chicago that was dedicated to healthcare, health education, biotechnology, and technology innovation. And we also had the overarching goal of fostering economic growth for the city of Chicago, the county of Cook, as well as the state of Illinois. Our work spans across multiple areas, but the majority of the work that we do can fit into just a few buckets. And those are public health, healthcare, real estate, finance, and economic growth and development. So job creation and creation of opportunities for people that are living in vulnerable communities, specifically on the West Side, but across our city as well. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, Andy Zopp.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Zopp. I'm the president and CEO of Rural Business Chicago. Rural Business Chicago is a public-private nonprofit partnership with the city, and we are, in essence, the city's economic development organization. We recruit companies to come here. We help companies that are here grow and expand, and we promote the city internationally to increase our foreign direct investment and help companies here that are interested in investing overseas. We focus on, our mission is really focused on inclusive economic growth. As you've heard others mention, it's really critically important for us to think about not just growing our central business district, but creating economic opportunity around our city, including in the neighborhoods. Well, this morning, and prior to this job, I was the neighborhood deputy mayor and neighborhood economic Development Officer for the city, and so have been focused on community development for some time. Really important topic this morning, and thrilled to be here. Healthcare and life sciences specifically, and technology generally are growth sectors for the city, and our focus areas both in the city's recovery task force that the mayor released earlier in July, and as part of our long-range economic development planning as well. And so happy to talk and on those topics this morning, because I think it is, as Kimberly has already said, really appropriate as we think about recovery, economic recovery from the pandemic.
Great, thank you. So now we'll jump into some of the questions that we have that will really start to tie together the high amount of potential in Chicago. So, as was mentioned, Chicago really is positioned to be an emerging science, sort of life sciences landscape. Andy, since you just spoke last, could you kick us off with what is our potential as a city, and what are some of the challenges that you're seeing from an economic development standpoint relative to life sciences in Chicago?
So in terms of potential, we need to talk about kind of the baseline. We have a significant and growing healthcare and life sciences community. We have CBRE has put us in the top 10 healthcare and life sciences markets in the country. We have a number of two of the 20 top hospitals in the country and the #1 rehab facility in the country. We are the second largest healthcare employer and life sciences employer in the country when you think about both the healthcare providers as well as the life sciences and the pharmaceutical companies as well. So we have and we also have a really strong startup community. So we have close to 400 tech and life science focused startups. They've raised over $2 billion over the last several years in terms of supporting those businesses. And so we have an incredible incubator focused on the life sciences community called Matter that's supporting startups in that sector. And so we're really well grounded. But we have a lot of work to do. We have real issues with wet lab space, and we have a number of entities that are looking to develop that, but that's an issue in terms of communicating. We have what's the best way I can say this, a reputation, reputation is not the right word. We're not branded yet as either an innovation community, although we are doing well when you look at the numbers. People, when they think innovation, Chicago does not come to the top of their minds. People, when they think of life sciences and healthcare, they think Boston or the San Francisco area. They don't necessarily think of Chicago. And so we have some work to do really to promote the assets that we have and what the opportunity that is there. And we also have, and then this is just the last point in terms of assets, in addition to the Illinois Medical District that Dr. McKinney talked about, and we'll talk about more. So we have a site where we can build a strong innovation, build on what's already a strong innovation district, and as well. So we have some real strengths there, but we also have a lot of great educational institutions that are graduating a number of students, thousands of students every year in these fields. And so we have an incredible base of talent for people who are looking to come. So those are some of the strengths and some of the challenges.
Great, thank you. Suzette, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the role of for-profit, nonprofit, the academic sector and the public sector all coming together to really create the right environment for the life sciences to flourish here in Chicago.
Sure. Thank you, Kimberly. And first, I'd like to say I completely agree with the strengths and the opportunities that Andy just mentioned. I think in terms of various entities coming together, the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, et cetera, I think one of the responsibilities needs to be coming together and developing a coherent mission, a coherent plan for our city, and really a holistic plan across all institutions. As Andy mentioned, we have phenomenal academic institutions here in Chicago. We also have phenomenal healthcare institutions here in Chicago. But I think when it comes to innovation districts or life sciences districts, one of our challenges is access, because I think we have very talented people in our neighborhoods, young entrepreneurs that just don't have the access to some of the world-class institutions or even some of our tech incubators. So I think part of the role would be to determine and identify ways to provide opportunities to those that don't have access to some of those world-class institutions. And then I think another role in terms of coming together, developing this holistic plan, is really looking at the landscape here in Chicago and determining how to best leverage the resources that we have. Certainly, the Illinois Medical District has been in existence for quite a long time. But if you look across the market today, you see life sciences developments beginning to either be planned or developed in areas across the city. And I think that that speaks to the importance of a holistic plan for our city, because with development spread across the Chicago market, I think that limits our impact. If you look at the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast, those cities have a single anchor institution that makes a substantial investment in innovation, in development, but also in community engagement. And so as a result, their innovation plans tend to be more cohesive and very scalable. I think that we could use the landscape here in Chicago to figure out how to best leverage our resources. But the most important two things in my mind are having a holistic plan for our city and how we will advance innovation here, and then also creating greater access for those who currently don't have it.
Great, thank you. So my next question is for Brenna. It goes without saying, this is a great panel of all women, and 30% of Chicago's startup founders are actually women. However, women only receive roughly 4% of the funding, as I understand. So this speaks to a larger issue of funding in this area overall. How do we get more funding for this specifically? And then can you speak to the disparities that you've seen in your work, and what can we do about that?
So actually 34% of all of our startups are founded by women in Chicago, which is the highest around the world. So yeah, you were close, but I think that's a really important number. And this is a really special panel because I'll tell you, I'm probably on more technology panels, not necessarily life science, but technology panels, and you can shake a stick at. And it's unusual to have this level of diversity, either from a gender or a race perspective on a panel. And it represents, frankly, the lack of diversity across tech or innovation investment that exists, not just in Chicago, but in other markets as well. And it probably, goes without saying, but it's important to remember that when you have, lack of diversity in founding and in leadership and in innovation, you don't have a representation of ideas or an understanding of needs. And that expresses itself in the technologies and solutions that become available in the marketplace. And we all pay a price for that in the long run. So it is important to make sure that you have capital flowing to founders that are women or that are diverse. And there's a number of ways, frankly, that Chicago's been going after that problem and continues to go after that problem. I know Andy certainly is in a better position to speak to and Andy, I apologize, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the venture program that we host every 2 years to bring more funding into Chicago specifically, and the ways within that program that we highlight the minority and women founders that exist across our community. And also the ways that we're encouraging corporate partnerships in our startup ecosystem as well, because there's more than one source for venture or founding capital as well, right? It's not all venture investment. Quite a bit of that comes from corporate partnerships and how you incubate startups in partnership with corporations. Andy mentioned Matter, right, which is our life sciences incubator here in Chicago. And when you walk into their sort of lobby in the merchandise mart, one of the first things you'll see is the number of corporate partners that they have that invest in that space. There's always room for more. But one of the things that Chicago has started to do very well, but there's always room for more, is for our corporations that call, the greater Chicago area home to step up and invest in, either through partnership or through capital, through mentoring. All of those ways are important. But to invest in the incubation of women and minority-led startups, and because they will benefit from the innovation that flows from that. And frankly, that's a key part of the success out in Silicon Valley or in the Boston area, is the role that corporations play in the flow of ideas and capital in those two regions. And we have some of that here. We certainly have really strong partnerships with corporations, in Matter and in some of our other spaces, but there can be more. So that's one of the things that I think has to happen.
Great, thank you. So Andy, I'll turn it back over to you to talk a little bit more about specifically the south and west sides of Chicago. And obviously, I think everyone is familiar with the new Invest Southwest initiative. And just curious how that is, there's potential for that to dovetail with really bolstering science and technology efforts in those parts of the city, which have experienced a lot of disinvestment over the last decades.
So I'm unmuted. I'm going to answer that question, but before I do that, I just want to build on a couple of things that Brenna said. Absolutely. about what we're doing and what needs to be done to really grow and expand both the opportunities for women entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs of color. So Brenna mentioned we have a program called the Chicago Venture Summit that we do typically every year or every 18 months. Obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but we didn't hold it this year because of COVID, but it's scheduled for next fall. But what we're doing instead is a program called Startup Chicago, where we are going to identify growing and strong startups, early stage startups, and put them in front of venture capitalists. And we are very focused on making sure that those startups and entrepreneurs are a diverse group because of exactly what Brenna said. It just is a fact of matter, just a fact that both women and startups of color have a much harder time getting capital. They just don't get the credibility, regardless of their ideas or their competency, that male-run companies do in the tech space. That's changing, as Brenna said, but we really have to continue to force feed it, and we're doing that. I think the other point that she talked on that's really critical, and this is critical both in terms of inclusion, but also just in terms of growing this sector, is the connecting entrepreneurs and startups to the corporate community. And it's really about monetizing these ideas and creating pathways to monetize them. You have a great idea and it's a brilliant, and you get it running and you've got the right science behind it, but you don't have a space to grow it and sell it. Then it almost doesn't matter. And we've not done a great job in Chicago of helping entrepreneurs monetize their ideas. And part of that is really also, and circles back to what Suzette was saying around innovation districts. The reason they work well in the places that they are is because you have those synergies happening in one space. And when you can get corporate R&D centers and innovation centers to also go into those spaces, then you have a lot of synergies. And we are working to do that here as well. And so then to just then circle back to the south and west sides of the city and the neighborhoods and how they fit into this space, we have we just, as the mayor has said, and as we all know, we have done a lot of investment in the neighborhoods, but there's more to come. I think the mayor's current initiative of Invest Southwest, which is really focused on corridors in 10 neighborhoods, really helps to focus those investments. But there's a lot of really interesting things happening in those communities. And just recently, just to name two, the North Lawndale community, the city just gave them a significant Neighborhood Opportunity Fund grant to build a healthcare focused center where they can improve access to healthcare, because we do know that building strong communities requires access to quality healthcare. That it's a factor in whether or not in healthy living if you can't get access to a doctor. So North Lawndale is doing that as well, and so they'll be bringing jobs to that community, but they'll also be bringing better access to healthcare for the residents of the community. And then in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood, there is a project that just won the Pritzker 10 million Pritzker Prize, led by the Auburn Gresham Community Development Corporation, but in partnership with a number of organizations, including Green Chicago, Mount Sinai Hospital, and it's creating a health sciences district, but also focused on environmental sustainability as well. And they've got a number of projects going on around that. So that includes life sciences and health sciences and direct healthcare delivery, and creating healthy living spaces for neighbors, but also moving into environmental sciences as well, which is equally important. One of the things they're building there is a digester that will take waste from restaurants and others and turn it into usable products that will not only create jobs, but also improve environment. So there is a lot of exciting things happening. Really important for those areas is the investment. The city is coming behind it. Now the Pritzker Foundation is helping, but we also need to start driving private investment into those areas as well. One of the things that we know when we look at neighborhoods is that their public investment is pretty high. The private investment is shockingly low, by significant factors. And we have to change that because the government cannot do it alone. And so really highlighting the great work that's going on, the talent that is there. And I know Suzette can talk to this as well about even the challenges of trying to drive investment, private investment into the IMD, which is also critically important. And how once that happens, it really starts to build some synergies and drive other growth. But it cannot just be government entities alone.
Great, thanks. So that's actually a perfect segue into my next question. So Suzette, how do we drive more private investment into Illinois Medical District?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would talk about is some of the work that we've done. The Illinois Medical District completed a white paper last year, and it was titled Restoring Chicago's Life Sciences Leadership. But in the paper, we highlighted a number of facts about life sciences and its economic impacts on cities. One that I like to talk about often is the fact that 40% of life sciences jobs only require a high school diploma or GED. So what we are doing in the Illinois Medical District, as we get developers interested in coming in to develop there, and I should pause and indicate that one of the reasons that we've been getting so much attention from developers and private investment recently is the fact that we have a portion of the medical district that is designated as a qualified opportunity zone. So we are leveraging that. And when we get developers that come to us interested in developing in the district, we emphasize life sciences as a priority for us. And in our real estate marketing, we are targeting life sciences companies as well as other private sector. And I think Andy hit the nail on the head when she spoke about the need for greater levels of private sector investment. But we are specifically targeting private sector healthcare, science, and technology-based businesses. And then also one of the anchors in the Illinois Medical District is leading the way, in my opinion, in opening up its doors to industry and inviting in, bringing in tech companies for partnership. They are looking at how they are providing healthcare. They're looking at their systems, patient engagement, and a number of other processes across their healthcare institution, and beginning to understand how tech and technology can really advance the work that they're trying to do. And I think that all of these things are important, especially for a place like the Illinois Medical District, because one of the things that we've learned specifically from the work that has been done by the Brookings Institution is that most successful innovation districts are located in communities, and they leverage those communities primarily because of the profound economic development that innovation districts can bring both to vulnerable communities, but also to a city's broader economy. And I think innovation districts bring not only investment to vulnerable communities, but also jobs, and finally amenities that perhaps were not or were previously missing from those communities. So as we approach development in the medical district and engage with private investors and private developers, we are taking all of those things into account and using those in our discussions and in our plans so that they are prioritized with those development efforts.
Great, thank you. Brenna, did you want to add anything else from your perspective with City Tech, just in terms of, incubating smaller companies and seeing those grow and locate throughout the city?
I think that one of the things that it's been touched on, but it's important to highlight, is the last several comments from both Andy and Suzette have been a fabulous list of ingredients that I think make it clear that there's no reason that Chicago shouldn't be leading the country as a life sciences market, right? We have great corporate companies. We have a really robust startup ecosystem. We have, strong government support under Mayor Lightfoot's leadership, et cetera. And we certainly have a commitment to and the beginnings of programs to make sure that there's, equity across the city and all of our communities as we invest in the life sciences, to make sure that it's, that this is an opportunity available to all of our communities. I think that what makes Chicago special around all of our innovation is that ecosystem and our ability to come together and sort of, make more out of our parts than they are on their own. But that does require a plan and leadership, which is something that Suzette highlighted, I think, in her very first comment, that if there isn't, structured organization around the investments that we make as a city, what you end up with is, investments that are made in an unstructured way, in more than one district across the city, or projects that are uncoordinated, and frankly, until we are a much stronger marketplace and have that brand recognition that Andy talked about, we can't afford to be uncoordinated in that way. It will slow down our progress, and instead we need to focus on coming up with that plan, having that recognized leadership, and rather than sprinkling investment in life sciences across the entire city, focus on where it should be focused and how to scale the benefits of that investment to the entire city so that all of Chicago benefits from the investment, which is, I think, a little bit different than traditional innovation thinking, which is, to plant 1,000 flowers and see which ones bloom. It's more about, planting a big tree and making sure that the acorns take root. And that's a very different perspective. I apologize. It's a slightly odd, botanical analogy, but for a long time, we haven't always had that plan to make sure we're planting a really big, strong tree with amazing roots that everyone will recognize is going to, live and prosper, and then making sure all of those acorns get, scattered far and wide to every community. So we end up with a really strong forest. I'm going to leave the analogy now. But I would just highlight that Chicago has an ecosystem, I think, stronger than any other. And bringing that ecosystem together around a plan is I think, the secret to our success.
That's great. Thank you. So kind of switching gears a little bit, thinking about the future of Chicago and the future of the science landscape here, what are some of the things that really any of the panelists can chime in here? What are some of the things that Chicago is doing or can be doing more of to really feed the pipeline, getting young students, K through 12, or even college students and others into the pipeline to have greater exposure to the STEM fields more broadly?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. And, I said this earlier, Brenna just mentioned it again, but I think the first step is figuring out that holistic plan for our city, because a plan that is structured, coordinated, and scalable will include leveraging our world-class institutions, as well as neighborhood talent. And I believe that those are really the first steps toward developing our brand as a life sciences hotspot. One of the other things I think, as we have great talent and great companies here in Chicago that are in the life sciences space or just the general tech space, I think it's important that our tech incubators and those companies within specifically identify opportunities where the talent that exists in the neighborhoods can have access to those resources. I had a recent conversation with the folks from DPI, and I was so impressed with the work that they are doing to engage students from the community. We started out talking about work and opportunities for medical students and engineering students, and I really pressed them about, well, what opportunities are available for young people, young talent that exists in the neighborhoods. And I think that's one of the key things. Funding obviously is always an issue, but as much as we can leverage those things to identify that where talent exists across our city, you know, whether it's found in a neighborhood or whether it's found in one of the amazing world-class institutions that we have, it's important to be inclusive. And I think it has the potential to become a great story for how our city identified talent from every corner of the city to advance us as a life sciences hotspot.
So if I could just build on that, on what Suzette said, so just, you know, she's absolutely right, but this talk a little bit about both. So CPS for some time has been focused on increasing their students' focus on STEM. We have, I think, 6 now high schools that have corporate partners that are invested in some aspect of science, technology, math, that have adopted each of those schools and provide internships and mentorships. And additionally, we have at city colleges, you know, several years ago now, we have focused Malcolm X on health and life sciences with a number of corporate partnerships, and they're building. They're really focused on trying to build out curriculum that matters to employers, and working closely with employers to do that and to build those relationships. And the other thing to remember about city colleges is we still have the STAR scholarships, where if you graduate from Chicago Public School with a B average or higher, you can go to city colleges for free. And so this idea around creating access and opportunity is really, really important, and doing that along the pipeline. The other thing that we're doing, you know, as part of the Recovery Task Force report, which is really the way I would think about that is not only is it about recovery, but it's really kind of the short range economic development. It's a little short range and longer range basis for economic development for the city. It's in part the plan, a little bit of the plan that Brenna and Suzette have been focusing on. I don't think we're quite as holistic as we need to be yet, but there is a focus on healthcare and life sciences. There's also a critical focus on workforce, because in the economic development work that we've been doing, every sector that we've talked to, where we've talked to professionals in that sector, has a concern about their talent pipeline, number one, and their diversity of their talent pipeline, number two. And so one of the things that I think will come out of this Recovery Task Force implementation work is a holistic, really looking at our workforce development pipeline and organizations, because there are a lot of people doing work in the workforce space, and whether including our educational institutions, but we're not coordinated, and we're not focused on how we build talent in the sectors that are growing, like healthcare and life sciences, how we engage young people in knowing what those careers are, and what the possibilities are for building those careers, and how do we better engage employers in connecting to students so that they can see those pathways. But we have, you know, Brenna said this, and I'll just reiterate it. We have all the assets here. We have some incredible, if you look at, for example, let's just take IIT, which has a focus on technology, but they have an incredibly diverse student population that if we retain them here could be a strong basis for both technology generally, but also life sciences. UIC just built a new engineering school that in the city, and they have dramatically increased their student population of color and their percentage of students coming from the city of Chicago. Chicago State University has a very strong pharmaceutical program, nursing program, and computer programs. So we have the institutions that are teaching students, and particularly diverse students. What we don't have is a great pipeline for those students into roles in these various sectors. And we're working on developing that, but it really is about, we do have all the assets. And the last thing I'll just mention is that, at World Business Chicago, we have a program called Think Chicago, which was created several years ago to elevate Chicago's profile with students, talented students in engineering and computer sciences in particular, but really in the technology space. And over the years, as we've been doing that program, we have really focused on diversifying the students in that program. And this year, we had a majority minority population and a very high percentage of women. And that's, again, really what you have to do. You have to be very intentional on saying, here's the talent, here's what they could do, and connecting them to the job and to the potential employers. Because if we just continue to assume it will happen, which is what we have done in the past, it won't. And we have to be very intentional about it.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, yeah, Brenna, would you like to react to that?
Yeah, no, I wanted to add one more quick example to the amazing list that Andy just provided, because there's also a lot of research that shows, the earlier at an age that you get kids excited about science and technology, the more likely they are to continue down that funnel into the number of programs and opportunities that Andy and Suzette outlined to create that pipeline that we need and we want in Chicago. And one of the best examples at both the middle school and the high school level in Chicago is an IoT-based program around air quality. We have a really unique program in Chicago around collecting micro level data around the air quality and community health and wellness of our entire city. That's a partnership between the University of Chicago and the city, and it's collecting more data about the city of Chicago and sharing that publicly than any other city in the world. That's being done at an academic level, funded by the federal government. The best part of that project, in my opinion, and I do get really excited about the wonky tech, but is that it has a complementary high school and middle school curriculum that was developed in one of our technology high schools and then expanded in the first summer to 12 other high schools, and then in the next summer to 20 more high schools and 20 middle schools. And it has a semester sort of physics component around the hardware, and then a follow-on semester around the biology and air quality side, utilizing the data. And that was entirely funded by the Motorola Foundation and developed in-house by the CPS curriculum team. And frankly, it's all open source and has now been adopted by 14 other cities around the country. So it's a great example, frankly, of the leadership that Chicago can rightly claim in this space, but also an even better example of creating that pipeline, as young, frankly, as sixth graders who can see, one, the importance of air quality in their community, but the role that they can play in a science and technology job that can impact, their parents at home, their friends on the streets, which I think makes it real for them and makes them a lot more likely to want to go to school and be a nurse or a doctor or a technician in a lab and go to work for Suzette at IMD.
Great. So Suzette, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what it means to come to IMD and to do the work that really looks at the future of science. Like, just tell us about that and what is doing to help attract more people from ideally throughout the Chicago region, but across the country and even the world.
Sure. So I will say that a lot of the work that we're doing involves our partnership with a group called Westside United. Westside United was started by Rush just a few short years ago, about 3 years ago. And it was started because we recognized the extreme disparity in life expectancy. If you live on the west side of Chicago, where the Illinois Medical District is located, and if you live in the Gold Coast. So 16-year difference in life expectancy, and for all practical purposes, because of the zip code where people live. And what we also identified is that in order to decrease that disparity, but also improve healthcare outcomes on the West Side, we had to do more targeted work around the social determinants of health and improving the social determinants of health. So things like lack of access to employment, lack of access to education, and also improve neighborhood infrastructure. And so that leads to some of the work that we're doing in the medical district to attract talent, attract students to the healthcare field, as well as the technology field. And I think Brenna even started to touch on this a bit, but we are partnering with Westside United as well as with a number of the city colleges and local high schools on the West Side, Chicago public schools, as well as charter schools, to create programs that will serve as pipeline programs to get students interested in careers in the healthcare field. But we're also working with institutions to identify internship opportunities so that we can keep students engaged over the summer months and also on the weekends and other times that students are not in school and available to participate in these programs to further enrich their knowledge about healthcare and technology and careers in those areas, but that can also continue to keep them engaged. Every day when I go to work, pre-COVID, of course, when I go to work in the Illinois Medical District, I see a vibrant community and a vibrant environment where the institutions that currently reside there are thriving. But I also see how much more vibrant and thriving the community as well as the neighborhoods to our west can become as a result of the work that we're doing. And I'm always very, very excited about that. And we continue to grow. And I like to say we push into outside of the medical district, but into other neighborhoods on the West Side by partnering with community-based organizations, as well as the aldermen in these communities, to help support programs and work that they are doing, but also recognizing that if we do this right in the Illinois Medical District, then there will be a natural progression further west to bring additional opportunities to those communities as well.
Great, thank you. So we'll now actually open it up for questions from the audience. So if those who've joined us have questions, please put those questions in the chat and I'll happily get to your questions. Also, it was brought to my attention that the slides that I was showing earlier that I thought everyone could see, people could not see. So I'm going to try that again, just as a way to give people a little time to put their questions in the chat. So for our panelists to let me know if you don't see the screen, that would be great. Can you see it now? Yes? Okay, great. Yeah, so just as I was saying earlier, we are talking about the importance of R&D, the clustering effect, powering urban infrastructure and generating prosperity for everyone. And honestly, I would give just a ton of kudos to our panel for really covering all of these topics. And then just as a visual for some of the projects that I mentioned earlier, and we'll certainly share this information later, but just some of the projects that can start to serve as an incubator or an economic engine in the different cities. So I just showed a project in San Francisco, another project that I worked on in Washington, D.C., a project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, UPMC, the Eskenazi Hospital in Indianapolis, and the project that our office in New York is working on when I was there, Harlem Hospital, around the corner from where I used to live. So So those are the projects that I was mentioning earlier that you could not see that I thought you could. And then, of course, our fabulous panel. So hopefully that was enough time to give us a chance to get some more questions from the audience. So now I see a question here. 1 second. So we talked about, so this is a question from one of our audience members. So we talked about internships and retaining local talent. What does that look like in the current climate given the pandemic? So would anyone like to take that question?
I think, look, in some instances, we have real workforce challenges, but in the life sciences sector, for a whole host of reasons, it's not as impacted. The challenge hospitals were impacted pretty dramatically because they had to shift their focus only to COVID, but they're recovering. And so because they did that, a lot of the other things that they do, particularly elective surgeries and the other work that they do, wasn't happening. And they had to let, furlough a number of people, but those are coming back. There are manufacturing opportunities in life sciences spaces. We're trying to really focus. There's going to be an incredible need, continuing need for PPE and manufacturing there. And so I think the short answer is, yeah, our economy is impacted, and so job opportunities are going to be impacted. But we know that there are sectors, life sciences and biological sciences and technology being one of them, that are going to grow because of COVID. And so I think it becomes even more important. Just to give you an example, let's just talk about contact tracing. The city and the state, the city created is funded for 600 contact tracer jobs, and they're focusing on organizations to hire out of communities. And so what does that mean? That means that you can pipeline people into the early stages of community health careers through contact tracers, and the state is doing the same thing as well. And the number of hospitals and health delivery organizations are recognizing, not only through telehealth, but the importance of community health advocates. And those contact tracing roles are going to be great pathways into those roles. So the short answer is, you're absolutely right. There are challenges arising from COVID, but there are sectors that are growing, and what we're trying to do is connect people, both people who've been displaced from jobs, but also people who have not been in middle income jobs, into some of these opportunities that are coming because of COVID.
Great.
And I would just like to build briefly on Andy's comments and just say, I've seen clear examples where many businesses and companies have gotten creative in the context of COVID for internship programs. I have seen examples where materials for experiments, if you will, have been shipped to a young person's home. And then there's some sort of virtual interaction, perhaps over a web-based platform, such as the one we're using for this panel today, where instruction can be given to the young person, and then they can conduct that work in the setting of their own home and gather data and do internet-based research and write up results and conclusions and things of that nature. So I think in light of COVID, it has forced many companies to just get creative about how they engage their interns and how they can still provide a robust and meaningful experience for students.
Great, thanks. So we have another question that's for Suzette. And then while she's answering the question, I want to kind of wrap it up with some thoughts that you have about the future. So maybe imagine Chicago 2030 and where we'd like to see the numbers. So for example, Brenna, if we're 34% women now, where we'd like to see it at, in 2030, and what are some of the things that all the panelists would like for us to see, or where should we be at that point? So the question for Suzette, however, is, can you comment on pending life sciences and medical development in the Illinois Medical District?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the Illinois Medical District has a section of our geography that is designated as a qualified opportunity zone. And so we have prioritized our development plans to really focus on life sciences as well as other healthcare, science, and technology-based businesses. But because so many private investors and private developers are interested in opportunity zone investments, we are planning to cluster our life sciences developments and those other developments for healthcare and science and technology businesses in our opportunity zone. We moved to that type of strategy because we thought it would create a win-win situation. A win for the investors and developers who were interested in the tax incentives that are brought about in opportunity zones, but also a win for the district and the surrounding community. And so we have a number of development projects that are moving through their negotiation phase and then their contracting phase now. And we are looking forward to seeing some of those developments get started very soon.
Great. So the last round of comments, I'll start with Brenna and then go to Suzette and finish up with Andy. But Chicago 2030, what are we looking at from a life sciences and technology landscape perspective?
Well, I think the topic of representation is so important, especially to drive innovation that serves everyone. So in any of the metrics that we measure, whether it's funding for women or founders of color, or if it's just the number of companies that we're incubating and the diversity there, or diversity in hiring, or in any of those places where we know there's been underrepresentation, we need to see that representation mirror the representation of our communities. And that's the only way that we're actually going to be able to see Chicago flourish in the way that I think we all know that it can. So what I'd like to see between now and 2030 is to see those numbers change, to really reflect the diversity and ingenuity that we know exists across all of our communities in Chicago. It's just a matter of creating the pathways to unlock all of that capacity.
Great, thank you. Suzette?
So what I would like to see, and 2030 is just 10 years away, but I'd like to see Chicago have our brand as the third coast by 2030. But I like to consider myself a visionary, and in doing so, I also like to think big. And so I would like to think that not only is Chicago established as the third coast by 2030, but that we also serve as a model for other cities across the country who perhaps did not have, the institutions or the talent or all of the ingredients that it takes to establish a city as a tech innovation hotspot, and that we modeled the way for other cities to come together around a holistic plan and leverage its private industry along with its communities and its nonprofit and government industries as well to achieve the great things that I know we are capable of achieving here in Chicago.
Thank you. And last but not least, Andy.
So I think 10 years seems like not a long time, but we can do a lot in 10 years. So 10 years ago, I started as the CEO of the Chicago Urban League. And at that time, I couldn't get anybody to talk about the neighborhoods. I'd go places and talk about what's happening in Inglewood or Bronzeville or what we needed. And it was just a non-topic. Now that's all people talk about is the neighborhood. And we're very focused on them. We have been probably for the last 5 years, and we're starting to see some results from that. And we have a mayor and city leadership very focused on economic and the private and the philanthropic sector as well, focused on how do we increase investments in the neighborhoods in those communities, and how do we, so that's number one. And then number two, how do we focus on inclusion when it comes to economic opportunity? So one of the things that's very powerful about the Recovery Task Force report is that it has a significant focus on addressing long-term systemic disinvestment in our communities and the impact on our economic growth, as Brenna has pointed out. When's the last time you saw that? And the Economy 2030 work, which WBC had been working on, also had that focus as well. And the business community is equally focused, in part because they were before George Floyd, but certainly after the George Floyd and the protests. The private sector is even more focused on recognizing that there are systemic barriers in their own structures around inclusion and growth, and are starting to have conversations that they've not had before about how do we address that. All of those things in my mind come together to help us move forward, both from an inclusion and an economic opportunity perspective, but then also we've spent this whole hour talking about the strengths and assets that we have when it comes to life sciences and building that community. And I anticipate that that's going to happen. So in Economy 2030, I see that we are going to be the third coast. I think that's a natural transition from where we are. And I think that we are going to continue to grow. And I think we are going to be way more inclusive than we have been. And I think you will see some of that development happening in communities on the south and west side. So I'm very excited for the future of the city and what we can accomplish, and for the groundwork that's being done now to make that change happen.
Well, great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your time and your thoughtfulness, and more broadly for the work that you're doing. So I'm excited about Chicago becoming the third coast, and just thank you to all of our participants for joining us today, and have a great rest of your morning.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.